The taste of copper still fills my mouth when I think about the day reality broke in half. My name is Commissar Thaddeus Kane, assigned to the Imperial archives beneath Terra's deepest foundations. For 37 years, I catalogued the forgotten, the erased, the never were, but nothing prepared me for finding a record of someone who was never born, yet somehow changed the course of the galaxy. You think that makes me mad, don't you? Standing here, telling you about phantom children and impossible memories. But you don't know what I've seen in the vaults where time itself weeps. Where servitor scribes write names that exist in no registry. Where parchments bear seals of chapters that never were. Where the Emperor's own hand supposedly blessed a boy whose birth was undone before his first breath. His name was Marcus Aurelius Thorne. According to records that shouldn't exist, he was destined to become the greatest Space Marine chapter master in Imperial history. According to reality, he never drew breath. Yet somehow, impossibly, the galaxy remembers him. And what I discovered about why he was never born will shake your faith in everything you thought you knew about the Imperium. Chapter 1. The Impossible Archive. The chronometer's amber glow cast dancing shadows across the endless rows of data slates as I descended into archive level Omega 7. This deep beneath Terra's crust, the weight of 10,000 years of human civilization pressed down like a physical thing. The air tasted of parchment dust and machine oil, tinged with something else. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's house on Cadia before the planet screamed its last. Commissar Kane, Adept Cornelius wheezed, his augmetic legs clicking against the ceramite flooring in a rhythm that had marked my days for the past decade. Your requested materials from the temporal anomaly section. His servo skull attendant bobbed beside him, carrying a data slate sealed with warning purity seals. I'd been tracking discrepancies in the historical record for months, names that appeared in cross-references but had no primary files, battle honors attributed to individuals with no service records, commendations signed by chapter masters who, according to official documentation, had never existed. The Administratum called such things clerical errors, the inevitable result of 10 millennia of bureaucratic entropy. But I knew better. The data slate hummed to life under my touch, its surface warming as machine spirits awakened. What I saw there defied everything I understood about Imperial record keeping. A complete service record for one Marcus Aurelius Thorne. Born on Macragge in 987 M41, inducted into the Ultramarines as a neophyte in 001 M42, rising through the ranks with unprecedented speed. According to this file, Marcus had served with distinction in the Indomitus Crusade, personally commanding 3 successful campaigns against the Tyrannid Hive Fleet Behemoth's splinter elements. He'd been decorated by Robert Gilliman himself. The record showed him elevated to captain of the 2nd Company at age 37, then chapter master by 42, the youngest in Ultramarine history. Adept, I called, but Cornelius had already vanished into the labyrinthine stacks. Typical. The archive keeps down here had developed an almost supernatural ability to disappear when inconvenient questions arose. I scrolled through the record, my augmetic eye analyzing each line for signs of forgery. The data signatures were authentic Administratum issue. The parchment scans showed proper aging, correct watermarks, even the subtle variations in servo skull script that marked genuine documents. Yet according to every other Imperial record I could access, Marcus Aurelius Thorne had never been born. The Ultramarines chapter records showed no such individual. Macragge's birth registries contained no entry under that name for 987 M41 or any adjacent year. The neophyte intake records for 0011 M42 showed full recruitment numbers, but no mention of a Marcus Thorne. It was as if someone had carefully extracted a single thread from the tapestry of Imperial history, leaving only the empty spaces where it once was. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar ache in my augmetic spine. 37 years in service to the throne had taught me that impossible things happened every day in the 41st millennium. Chaos could bend reality, Xenos technology could rewrite history, and the warp itself sometimes vomited up paradoxes that defied rational explanation. But this felt different. The record was too perfect, too detailed. Real forgeries always contain tells, anachronistic terminology, incorrect dating systems, subtle errors in protocol. This file read like it had been compiled in real time by someone who had lived through every moment it described. More disturbing still were the marginal notes, written in what appeared to be Marcus's own hand. "Remember the lesson of Sergeant Cassius?" one notation read alongside a tactical assessment. "Courage without wisdom is just elaborate suicide. The Emperor protects, but he expects us to be worth protecting," another said, next to an after-action report from the Battle of Karen's Gate. These weren't the sterile observations of an Administratum scribe. They carried the weight of lived experience, the hard-earned wisdom of a veteran warrior. Yet the man who supposedly wrote them had never existed. I activated my Vox link and hailed Magos Biologis Altrix, my contact in the Department of Genetic Records. If Marcus Aurelius Thorne had been born on Macraga, there would be genetic samples in the ultramarine recruitment database. DNA didn't lie, and it couldn't be wished out of existence. "Kane," Altrix's mechanical voice crackled through the comm unit. "To what do I owe this interruption of my sacred duties? I need a genetic marker analysis for one Marcus Aurelius Thorne, supposed ultramarine neophyte intake 0011M42. A pause. The soft clicking of mechanical fingers on cogitator keys. Then, negative result. No genetic record under that designation. However, there exists an orphaned genetic sequence in the Macraga database. Sample taken 987-M41. No associated identification. The profile suggests exceptional physical and mental conditioning compatibility with Astartes augmentation. Our purity rating exceeds 97th percentile. But no name, no family record, no follow-up documentation. My blood ran cold. An orphaned genetic sample from the exact year Marcus was supposedly born, on the exact world he claimed as home. Someone had taken great care to erase his identity while leaving just enough traces to prove he had once existed. "Magos, I'm transmitting the service record I have. Can you cross-reference the genetic markers?" Another pause, longer this time. When Altrix spoke again, her voice had lost its usual mechanical precision. "Commissar, this is deeply troubling. The genetic signature matches perfectly. But there's something else. According to this data, the subject's genetic pattern shows signs of targeted modification." "What kind of modification?" "The type performed on individuals selected for the Primaris marine enhancement process. But the modifications were performed on a baseline human, not an Astartes, and they were done before birth, during fetal development. This level of genetic manipulation would require resources and knowledge available only to who, Magos? Only to someone with access to Belisarius Cowl's laboratories, or to the Emperor himself." I closed the Vox channel and stared at the data slate in my hands. The implications were staggering. Someone had genetically engineered Marcus Aurelius Thorne before birth, preparing him for a destiny that would never come. Someone with access to the highest levels of Imperial technology and authority. Someone who knew that this boy would be erased from existence and wanted to leave a trail for people like me to find. The archive suddenly felt colder. The shadows seemed to move independently of the chronometer's glow. I'd stumbled onto something vast and terrible, something that reached into the very foundations of Imperial history. And I was beginning to suspect that Marcus Aurelius Thorne's non-existence wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of temporal warfare. I gathered the data slate and rose from my desk, my boots echoing in the silent archive. Level Omega-7 housed more than just forgotten records. In the deepest vaults, beyond even my considerable clearance, lay the temporal concordance, artifacts and documents recovered from timeline fractures, evidence of wars fought across causality itself. If Marcus Aurelius Thorne had been erased from history, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to do it. And they had powerful enemies who wanted his memory preserved. I was caught between forces I barely understood. holding evidence of a crime that technically never happened. But as I walked through the endless rows of data slates and parchment scrolls, each containing the recorded deeds of heroes and villains across 10,000 years of human struggle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by hidden observers or surveillance servitors, but by the weight of history itself. By the accumulated momentum of 10 millennia of human achievement and failure, all of it somehow connected to a boy who was never born. The archive's machine spirits whispered in frequencies just below human hearing. Tonight, their songs sounded almost like a lullaby, almost like the song a mother might sing to a child who would never wake. Tomorrow, I would begin tracing the connections. Tomorrow, I would start following the trail that someone had carefully laid through the labyrinth of imperial bureaucracy. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand why the galaxy remembered Marcus Aurelius Thorne. But tonight, I would dream of copper taste and impossible memories, and wonder what else had been torn from the fabric of reality when that boy was unborn. Chapter 2. Traces of the never-were sleep brought no peace. In my dreams, I stood in a vast cathedral ship floating through the warp, its Gothic spires reaching into swirling tides of purple and gold that hurt to perceive directly. A figure in cobalt blue power armor knelt before an altar that gleamed with artificial stars, his bare head bowed in prayer or grief. When he looked up, his face was young but carried the weight of centuries, eyes the color of Terra's ancient oceans. "Remember us, Kane," he whispered, and I knew with dream logic certainty that this was Marcus Aurelius Thorne. Remember what we might have been. I woke with the taste of copper flooding my mouth and the sound of bolter fire echoing in my ears. My chronometer showed 0347 hours local time, deep in Terra's artificial night cycle. The HAB unit around me felt smaller than usual, its walls pressing in with the weight of the planet above. I reached for the Amasec bottle on my nightstand and found my hands shaking. The Vox unit chimed with an incoming priority transmission. At this hour, it could only mean emergency or disaster. In my experience, they were usually the same thing. "Commissar Kane," a voice I didn't recognize said when I accepted the channel. "This is Interrogator Dex of the Ordo Chronos. You are to report to Inquisitorial Facility Gamma 97 immediately. A transport is waiting at your building's landing platform." The line went dead before I could respond. The Ordo Chronos, the most secretive branch of the Inquisition, tasked with monitoring temporal anomalies and protecting the flow of causality itself. If they were calling me in, my investigation into Marcus Aurelius Thorne had attracted attention from the very highest levels of imperial authority. That could mean validation or vaporization, depending on whose interests I'd stumbled into. I dressed quickly in full commissarial regalia, complete with bolt pistol and chainsword. If this was to be my last day of service to the throne, I would face it properly armed and uniformed. The transport waiting on my platform was a sleek Inquisitorial cutter, its hull inscribed with wards against temporal disturbance and bearing the rosette of the Ordo Chronos. "Commissar Kane." The pilot's voice emerged from hidden Vox grills, mechanically distorted beyond recognition. "We are cleared for immediate departure." The flight through Terra's upper atmosphere took 17 minutes, passing over the great hive spires and orbital tethers that connected the throne world to the shipping lanes above. At this altitude, I could see the ancient scars where continents had been carved into new configurations, the geometric precision of planned cities stretching to every horizon. Somewhere far below, in archives buried beneath mountains of administrative machinery, lay the evidence of Marcus Aurelius Thorne's impossible existence. Inquisitorial Facility. Gamma 97 occupied an entire mountain peak, its brutalist architecture emerging from living rock like some vast technological tumor. Landing platforms jutted from the structure at impossible angles, and I could see the blue flicker of void shields shimmering around key installations. Whatever happened here was important enough to warrant fortress-level protection. Interrogator Dex met me at the landing platform's edge, a tall woman in the black leather of the Inquisition with augmetic implants that gleamed silver against her dark skin. Her eyes were the pale gold of someone who had gazed too long into temporal distortions. And when she spoke, her words carried an odd echo, as if she were speaking from multiple points in time simultaneously. "Commissar Kane," she said, gesturing for me to follow her into the facility's depths. "Your investigation into the Thorne anomaly has progressed faster than we anticipated. Come. The Chronarch wishes to speak with you personally." We descended through levels of increasing security, past guards in power armor and servitors whose optical arrays tracked our movement with mechanical precision. The facility's corridors were lined with chronometer banks showing time flows from across the galaxy, their displays flickering with readings that hurt to contemplate directly. Here and there, I caught glimpses of laboratories where white-robed adepts studied artifacts that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "Tell me, Commissar," Dex said as we walked, "what do you know of the Primarch Project's true scope?" The question caught me off guard. Every Imperial citizen knew the basic facts about the Primarch Project, the Emperor's creation of 20 superhuman sons to lead his great crusade, half of whom fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy. But Dex's phrasing suggested depths to the story that weren't public knowledge. "Only what the approved histories record, Interrogator." "The approved histories," she repeated, her voice carrying that temporal echo again. "Yes. But what if I told you the Primarch Project actually created 21 sons, not 20? What if one of them was removed from reality before he could take his first breath, his very existence becoming a wound in causality itself?" We stopped before a vault door that stretched from floor to ceiling, its surface inscribed with mathematical formulae that made my augmetic eye water when I tried to focus on them. Dex pressed her palm against a bioscanner, and the massive portal began to iris open. "What if I told you that Marcus Aurelius Thorne was intended to become the gene seed of that lost Primarch, the first of a new generation of Astartes, bred not for conquest, but for something else entirely?" The chamber beyond the vault door defied architectural logic. Its walls curved away in all directions, creating a spherical space that somehow contained far more volume than its physical dimensions should have allowed. At the center, floating in a column of golden light, hung artifacts that pulsed with temporal energy, data slates covered with equations, genetic samples suspended in stasis fields, and what appeared to be fragments of power armor in a color I'd never seen before, deep green shot through with veins of silver. "The Chronarch will explain," Dex said, gesturing toward a figure emerging from the chamber's depths. Chronarch Valdez was ancient, even by Inquisitorial standards, his body more machinery than flesh after centuries of cybernetic augmentation. His face was a silver mask etched with chronometer circuits, and his eyes were temporal sensors that showed the flow of causality as shifting patterns of light. When he spoke, reality seemed to bend slightly around his words. "Commissar Kane," he said, his voice carrying harmonics from past and future moments simultaneously. "You have been investigating an individual who exists in the spaces between time. Marcus Aurelius Thorne was created to serve a purpose that was never allowed to unfold." "Created by whom, my lord?" "By the Emperor himself, in the final days before the Horus Heresy. Our investigations suggest that the Master of Mankind foresaw a future where the Imperium would face threats that could not be defeated by force of arms alone. He began work on a new type of Astartes, warriors capable of fighting in multiple dimensions simultaneously, of existing partially outside linear time." Valdez gestured toward the floating artifacts, and one of them, a genetic sample suspended in amber, drifted closer for my inspection. "This contains DNA taken from the original Primarch. We call him the 21st. His purpose was to father a chapter of Astartes who could wage war against enemies that attacked from outside conventional reality, chaos entities that existed between moments, xenos species that moved through temporal dimensions, threats that could only be countered by warriors who were partially unmoored from causality themselves." I stared at the genetic sample, trying to process the implications. But something went wrong. Something went catastrophically right, the Chronarch corrected. The Chaos Gods detected the project before it could be completed. They realized that these new Astartes would represent a permanent threat to their ability to manipulate reality. So they did something unprecedented. The golden light in the chamber fluctuated, and I caught glimpses of other scenes. Laboratories burning with warp fire, tech priests screaming as their memories were rewritten. The Emperor himself standing over a pod that contained something precious and fragile. They reached backward through time and prevented the 21st Primarch from ever being born. Not killed, erased, unborn. The project collapsed, the laboratories were forgotten, and the very concept of temporal warfare was struck from Imperial doctrine. Then how does Marcus Aurelius Thorne fit into this? Dex stepped forward, her augmetic implants gleaming. Because the Emperor, in his wisdom, created safeguards. Before the Chaos Gods could complete their unmaking of the project, he scattered genetic samples across time and space. Marcus was one of those samples, a human child engineered to carry the potential for what his Primarch might have been. The pieces began falling into place. Someone found those genetic samples and tried to recreate the project. Precisely, Valdez confirmed. We believe Belisarius Cull discovered references to the original research during his work on the Primaris Marine project. He began attempting to recreate the temporal warriors, using Marcus as a test subject, but forces unknown intervened, erasing Marcus from history before he could complete his transformation. I thought about the service record I'd found, the impossible details of a life that never was. But why leave traces? Why make it possible for someone like me to find evidence? Because someone wants the project to be discovered and completed, Dex said grimly. Someone who understands that the threats the Emperor foresaw are beginning to manifest. The galaxy is heading toward a crisis that conventional Astartes cannot address. Valdez activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic situation. Chaos incursions that appeared and disappeared without pattern. Tyranid splinter fleets that seemed to move through dimensional space. Necron tomb worlds awakening with technologies that manipulated time itself. The enemies we face now exist partially outside normal reality, he explained. They attack from angles we cannot defend against using conventional warfare. We need warriors who can meet them on their own terms. And you think I can help recreate these temporal Astartes? You found Marcus Aurelius Thorne when our own investigators could not, Valdez said. You have a natural talent for seeing patterns in causality, for detecting the spaces where reality has been edited. We need that talent for what comes next. He gestured, and another artifact floated forward, a data slate containing schematics I didn't recognize. The technical diagrams showed Astartes' enhancement procedures, but modified with elements that seemed to exist partially in mathematics rather than physical space. We have recovered enough of the original research to begin a new attempt. But we need to find the other genetic samples that the Emperor scattered through time. We need to locate them before the same forces that unmade Marcus can strike again. What makes you think they won't just erase this project again? Dex smiled, and for a moment her temporal echoes aligned, making her appear momentarily solid and real. Because this time, we know they're watching. This time, we can take precautions. And this time, we have allies they don't expect. She activated another display, and I saw something that made my breath catch. Battle footage from across the galaxy, showing Astartes who moved with impossible speed and precision. Warriors who seemed to step between moments, striking enemies that shouldn't have been vulnerable to conventional weapons. Some of the genetic samples have already awakened spontaneously, Valdez explained. Across dozens of different chapters, Battle Brothers are manifesting abilities they shouldn't possess. They don't understand what's happening to them, but they're beginning to remember things that never were. They're remembering Marcus Aurelius Thorne. They're remembering what he represented, the chronarch corrected. The potential that lies dormant in every Astartes genome, waiting for the right trigger to manifest. The 21st Primarch may have been unborn, but his legacy lives on in the genetic code of his would-be sons. I looked around the chamber, taking in the artifacts and data screens, the evidence of a project that spanned 10 millennia and touched every corner of the galaxy. Somewhere out there, battle brothers were fighting enemies that existed between moments, defending the Imperium with abilities they didn't understand. And somewhere else, forces of chaos were working to unravel the very foundations of reality. What do you need me to do? Valdez's mechanical features shifted into what might have been a smile. Help us find the others, Commissar. Help us gather the scattered pieces of the Emperor's final gambit. Help us prepare for a war that will be fought not just for the galaxy's future, but for its right to exist at all. As I stood in that impossible chamber, surrounded by artifacts from a project that had been unborn from history, I felt the weight of destiny settling around my shoulders like a commissarial greatcoat. Marcus Aurelius Thorne had never existed, but his memory was about to change everything. The war for causality itself was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Unmaking Revealed. The journey to the first genetic samples location took us beyond the borders of Imperial space, into the howling void where reality grew thin and strange. Our ship, the Temporal Aegis, was a unique vessel crafted by the Ordo Chronos, specifically for operations in regions where causality itself had been damaged. Its hull incorporated archaeotech from the dark age of technology, allowing it to maintain temporal stability even when passing through areas where past and future bled together like watercolors in the rain. I stood on the observation deck, watching the twisted geometries of the Medusa expanse writhe beyond the void shields. Here, in this forgotten corner of space, lay the tomb world of Cannabet Prime, one of the oldest Necron strongholds, sealed away during the war in heaven itself. According to the data we'd recovered from the Chronarch's archives, this was where the Emperor had hidden one of the 21st Primarch's genetic samples, disguised as an inert Xenos artifact. Commissar, Interrogator Dex materialized beside me, her temporal echoes more pronounced in this region of damaged space-time. We're receiving signals from the tomb world's surface. It appears our arrival was expected. That news sent cold fingers down my spine. Necron technology was ancient beyond human comprehension, incorporating principles of physics that could manipulate time, space, and causality with casual precision. If they had detected our approach, it meant they wanted us to know it. Expected by whom? Unknown. But the signal is broadcasting on Imperial frequencies, using authentication codes from the 30th millennium. We made our way to the ship's bridge, where Captain Thorne, no relation to our mysterious Marcus, despite the shared surname, stood before a bank of cogitator screens displaying tactical readouts. The Temporal Aegis was a compact vessel, built for speed and stealth rather than direct confrontation, but it mounted weapon systems that could engage enemies existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. "Report," I ordered. "The signal originates from what appears to be an Imperial facility within the tomb world structure," Captain Thorne explained, her augmetic eye flickering as it processed the sensor data. Architectural scans suggest it's built into the Necron superstructure, as if it was added sometime after the tomb world's initial construction. Dex studied the tactical displays, her expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. "This doesn't match any of our intelligence reports. According to Chronarch Valdez's research, the genetic sample was hidden in a stasis vault, not an active facility. Perhaps someone else found it first," I suggested, though the thought filled me with dread. If agents of chaos had reached the genetic sample ahead of us, they could use it to unravel the 21st Primarch's legacy even more completely than they already had. The communication array chimed with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged from the speakers made my blood run cold. It was human, speaking High Gothic, with an accent I recognized from the archive recordings. An accent from Macraga, cultured and precise. "Imperial vessel, Temporal Aegis. This is Captain Marcus Aurelius Thorne of the 20th Legion, requesting permission to come aboard." Dead silence filled the bridge. According to our records, Marcus Aurelius Thorne had never been born. According to reality itself, he had never existed. Yet here he was, speaking to us from within a Necron tomb world. claiming membership in a legion that had been disbanded before the Horus Heresy. "This is impossible," Dex whispered, her temporal echoes fracturing into visible distortions around her body. "Impossible is relative," I replied, activating the communication channel. "Unknown contact. Identify yourself and explain your presence in this location." "Commissar Kane, I presume," the voice responded, carrying warmth and humor that seemed utterly out of place given our situation. "I've been waiting for you for quite some time. Please, bring your landing party to coordinates I'm transmitting now. We have much to discuss, and time is running shorter than you know." The coordinates appeared on our tactical display, marking a location deep within the tomb world structure. Captain Thorne's augmetic eye whirred as she analyzed the data. "The coordinates lead to a chamber that registers as actively occupied but temporally displaced," she reported. "The chronometer readings suggest the facility exists approximately 7 minutes and 37 seconds in the future relative to our current temporal position." Dex activated her personal temporal stabilizers, the devices humming to life around her armor. "A temporal pocket. Someone has carved out a space between moments and taken up residence there. Highly advanced technology would be required for such a feat." "Necron technology," I concluded, "but repurposed for human use. Someone has been very busy." We assembled a small landing party, myself, Dex, and a squad of Tempestus Scions, equipped with specialized gear for operating in regions of temporal disturbance. The temporal Aegis positioned itself in a stable orbit around Carnabet Prime, ready to extract us if the situation deteriorated. The tomb world's surface was a nightmare landscape of metal and shadow, vast pyramidal structures jutting from planes of living metal that shifted and reconfigured themselves according to patterns older than human civilization. Our lander touched down at the designated coordinates, and I immediately felt the weight of ancient malevolence pressing against my thoughts. "Geller field generators at maximum," I ordered. "Whatever's waiting for us down there has had access to Necron technology for an unknown period. Assume hostile intent until proven otherwise." The entrance to the facility lay hidden beneath a sphinx-like structure, its features combining Necron geometric precision with Imperial architectural elements. As we approached, the massive doors began to cycle open, revealing a corridor that stretched into blue-tinged darkness. "Welcome, friends," came the voice of Marcus Aurelius Thorne, echoing from speakers built into the corridor walls. "Please, follow the illumination strips. Mind the temporal distortions. They're mostly stable, but a few can be surprising if you're not prepared." We advanced carefully, our weapons ready and our temporal stabilizers casting protective fields around us. The corridor was lined with artifacts that defied easy categorization. Necron technology merged seamlessly with Imperial systems, creating hybrid devices whose functions I couldn't begin to guess. The chamber at the corridor's end was vast and circular, its walls covered with data displays showing tactical information from across the galaxy. At its center stood a figure in power armor that hurt to look at directly. Deep green ceramite shot through with silver threading that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. When he removed his helmet, I found myself looking at a face I'd seen in dreams. Marcus Aurelius Thorne appeared to be in his early 40s, with the enhanced physique and bearing of an Astartes chapter master. His eyes held depths that spoke of decades of warfare and command, and when he smiled, it carried genuine warmth despite the impossible circumstances of our meeting. "You're not real," Dex stated flatly, her temporal sensors focused on him like weapon systems. "You were never born. You don't exist." "Existence is a more flexible concept than you might think, Interrogator," Marcus replied, gesturing for us to approach the central data display. "I exist because I was never allowed not to exist. Let me explain." The display activated, showing a timeline that stretched from the 30th millennium to the current era. But this timeline was wrong, twisted, with branches and loops that violated every principle of causality I understood. "When the Chaos Gods unmade my birth, they created a paradox," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing fellow officers. "They erased me from the primary timeline, but my potential existence created echoes throughout all parallel realities. I exist in the spaces between what was and what might have been. He gestured, and the display showed dozens of branching timelines, each containing variations of galactic history. In some, the Horus heresy never happened. In others, the Emperor still walked among his people. In a few, humanity had spread to other galaxies entirely. I've been traveling between these echoes for subjective centuries, gathering intelligence on threats that exist outside normal space-time. The Necrons of this tomb world were among the first to recognize what I represented, a weapon against enemies that could attack across multiple realities simultaneously. The Necrons are working with you. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Not all Necrons are mindless killers, Commissar. Some dynasties remember the war in heaven's true scope, the cosmic threats that forced their ancestors to submit to biotransference in the first place. They understand that some enemies are too dangerous to fight alone. Dex stepped forward, her augmetic implants sparking as they tried to process the temporal distortions around Marcus. What kind of enemies? The display changed, showing imagery that made my sanity recoil. Entities that existed as living voids in reality, consuming not just matter and energy but the very concept of existence itself. Entire star systems simply ceasing to be, leaving behind gaps in space-time where nothing had ever been. The true death, Marcus said grimly. Entities from outside the galaxy's light cone, older than the old ones themselves. They've been probing our reality for eons, testing its defenses. The Chaos Gods, the Tyranids, even the Satan, they're all responses to the presence of something infinitely worse. And you believe the 21st Primarch project was created to fight these entities? I know it was. I've seen the Emperor's original notes, recovered from timelines where the Horus heresy never happened. He foresaw their coming and prepared accordingly. The 21st Legion was intended to be his final gambit, Astartes capable of existing in multiple realities simultaneously, able to strike at enemies that attacked from outside conventional space-time. Marcus activated another section of the display, showing technical schematics that made my head hurt. Armor systems that existed partially in mathematical space, weapons that fired shots through alternate timelines, enhancement procedures that allowed a warrior to spread his consciousness across multiple probability states. But the project was never completed, I pointed out. The Chaos Gods prevented your birth. They prevented my birth in the primary timeline, Marcus corrected. But by creating that act of temporal violence, they also created the conditions for my existence in all adjacent realities. I am what the 21st Primarch became when freed from the constraints of linear causality. Dex was studying her sensor readings, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. The temporal distortions around you are accelerating. You're becoming unstable. Marcus nodded grimly. The true death has detected my presence. They're beginning to focus their attention on this reality, preparing for a direct assault. I estimate we have perhaps 6 months before they breach the barriers between universes. What do you need from us? Help me gather the other genetic samples. Help me complete what the Emperor began. The scattered children of the 21st Primarch are beginning to awaken across the galaxy. Astartes who carry dormant genetic potential that could be activated with the right trigger. He gestured to a stasis vault that dominated one wall of the chamber. Inside, I could see a genetic sample identical to the one in the Chronarch's possession, but this one pulsed with eldritch light that suggested active temporal manipulation. This sample has been enhanced with Necron chronometry. It contains not just genetic material, but temporal encoding that could allow its recipients to access memories and skills from alternate timelines. Warriors created from this template would be able to learn from the experiences of their other dimensional selves. The implications were staggering. Astartes, who could access the tactical knowledge of infinite variations of themselves, drawing upon strategies and techniques from realities where different choices had been made. How many samples remain to be gathered? 17, Marcus replied, scattered across the galaxy in locations chosen for their temporal stability. But we're not the only ones seeking them. Chaos forces led by someone calling himself the Chronarch of Endings has been hunting them systematically. Dex looked up sharply. That's not possible. Chronarch Valdez leads our operations. Marcus's expression grew troubled. Interrogator: when did you last verify Valdez's temporal signatures? When did you last confirm that he was operating from your native timeline? The question hit like a thunderbolt. Dex activated her temporal sensors, scanning the quantum signatures of her own equipment. Her face went pale as the readings returned. "Emperor, preserve us," she whispered. "We've been operating under temporal displacement for weeks. Our entire mission may have been compromised from the beginning." The facility's alarm systems began wailing, and the display screens showed new contacts dropping out of warp around Carnabet Prime. Ships whose hulls bore the 8-pointed star of chaos, their weapon systems charging as they took attack positions around our vessel. "Too late," Marcus said, beginning to don his helmet. "They've found us. But that may work in our favor. The real Valdez will detect the temporal disruption and respond. The question is whether he'll arrive in time." As we raced back toward the landing platform, I couldn't help but wonder how deep the deception ran. How many of our operations had been compromised? How long had agents of the True Death been manipulating events from within the Ordo Chronos itself? Marcus Aurelius Thorne ran beside us, his power armor's systems humming with energies I didn't recognize. He existed in violation of every natural law I understood, a paradox made manifest by forces beyond comprehension. But he might be the only hope we had for survival against enemies that could erase entire realities from existence. The war for causality was no longer coming. It had already begun, and we were losing. Chapter 4: The Convergence of Never Was. The battle for Carnabet Prime erupted across multiple dimensions simultaneously. As our lander burst from the tomb world's surface, I watched through the viewports as Chaos vessels engaged not just the temporal Aegis, but several other versions of our ship that flickered in and out of existence like ghosts. The enemy's weapons fired across timeline barriers, their shots sometimes striking targets that hadn't arrived yet, or hitting versions of our vessel that had already been destroyed in adjacent realities. "Multiple temporal incursion detected," Captain Thorne's voice crackled over the comm system. "Enemy forces are attacking from at least 17 different probability streams, initiating quantum evasion protocols." Marcus Aurelius Thorne, the impossible space marine who shouldn't exist, stood at the lander's tactical station, his fingers dancing across controls that reconfigured themselves under his touch. His power armor's systems were interfacing directly with the craft's machine spirits, creating hybrid human Necron technology that operated on principles I couldn't begin to understand. "Commissar," he said without looking up from his work, "I need you to understand something crucial about what we're facing. The Chaos forces attacking us aren't just traitor Astartes or demon engines. They're temporal weapons, warriors who exist in multiple realities simultaneously, drawing power from alternate versions of themselves." Through the lander's sensor displays, I could see the truth of his words. Enemy boarding parties were materializing directly inside the temporal Aegis, their forms shifting and wavering as they phased between different versions of the ship. Our own defensive forces were fighting battles on decks that sometimes didn't exist, against enemies who could strike from angles that violated three-dimensional space. "How do we fight something like that?" Dex demanded, her temporal stabilizers sparking as they struggled to maintain her coherence in the increasingly unstable local space-time. "By becoming something like that ourselves," Marcus replied grimly. He activated a device built into his armor's chest plate, and suddenly, I could see him from multiple angles simultaneously. Not just the Marcus standing before us, but dozens of other versions, some wearing different armor, some bearing different ranks, all of them focused on the same desperate mission. "I'm activating the Primarch level enhancement protocols," he explained, as his form began to stabilize again, drawing on tactical knowledge from every version of myself across the probability manifold. "But the process is dangerous. Too much exposure to alternate selves can cause permanent psychological fragmentation." Our lander docked with the temporal Aegis, just as explosions began tearing through its hull. The ship's corridors had become a nightmare maze where different sections existed in different time streams, forcing us to navigate by compass readings that changed from moment to moment. "Bridge is 3 decks up, section C7. Captain Thorne's voice guided us through the chaos. "But be advised, C7 is currently experiencing temporal flux. You may encounter crew members from alternate timeline versions of our mission." We fought our way through corridors filled with smoke and the screams of dying machine spirits. Our enemies wore the colors of chaos, but their armor incorporated technological elements that predated human civilization. They moved with inhuman coordination, each warrior perfectly synchronized with alternate versions of themselves, fighting identical battles in adjacent realities. Tyrannid modification techniques combined with chaos corruption, Marcus observed as he cut down an enemy with a blade that existed partially outside normal space. Someone has been experimenting with ways to enhance human warriors using Xeno's biology. The results are disturbing. Indeed they were. The Chaos Marines we faced showed signs of Tyrannid biological integration, organic weapon systems growing directly from their flesh, sensory organs that operated on spectrums unknown to baseline humans, regenerative capabilities that allowed them to survive wounds that should have been instantly fatal. But why? I gasped between bolter rounds, my weapon's machine spirit singing hymns of purification as it dispatched another abomination. What could Chaos gain from incorporating Xenos biology? Power over causality itself, Marcus replied. The Tyrannids exist outside the galaxy's temporal structure. That's why they can traverse intergalactic space without aging. By incorporating their biology into Chaos Marines, someone has created warriors who can attack from outside the normal flow of time. We reached the bridge to find Captain Thorne coordinating a defense against enemies who were attacking from the ship's own past. Her tactical displays showed boarding parties that had somehow inserted themselves into the vessel's construction phase, attempting to sabotage critical systems before the temporal aegis had ever launched. Chronarch Valdez is responding to our distress beacon, she reported. But his forces are engaged with another enemy fleet in what appears to be the same spatial coordinates, displaced by roughly 47 minutes. Marcus studied the tactical readouts, his expression growing increasingly grim. They're not just attacking us, they're attacking every possible version of this mission across all probability streams. Someone wants to ensure that no version of reality succeeds in recovering the genetic samples. The false Valdez, Dex concluded. He's been using Ordo Chronos resources to hunt down the samples systematically. But why? What does he gain from preventing the 21st Primarch project? Power beyond imagining, a new voice answered from the bridge's entrance. We turned to see a figure in Inquisitorial regalia, but something was terribly wrong with him. Chronarch Valdez, or the thing wearing his form, stood with portions of his body existing in different temporal states. His left arm was younger, his right leg aged decades beyond the rest of his body, and his face shifted between multiple versions of itself as we watched. You cannot comprehend what you're interfering with, the false Valdez continued, his voice carrying harmonics from across multiple timelines. The 21st Primarch was designed to be the Emperor's ultimate weapon against entities like myself. His existence would doom countless realities to stagnation and order. Marcus stepped forward, his impossible power armor humming with energies that made the air itself taste of copper and ozone. You're not chaos, are you? You're something else entirely. I am entropy, given form, the false Valdez replied. I am the force that ensures all realities eventually progress toward more interesting states. Order is death, young Primarch. Chaos is life, and your existence threatens to tip the balance too far toward stagnation. The entity raised its hand, and I felt reality begin to unravel around us. The bridge's bulkheads aged centuries in seconds, metal corroding into dust as time itself accelerated. Our weapons began to malfunction as their machine spirits experienced temporal displacement. Their consciousness scattered across multiple moments simultaneously. You're not preventing stagnation, Marcus replied, his form beginning to shift between multiple temporal states as he prepared for battle. You're preventing growth. True progress comes from the tension between order and chaos, not from the dominance of either force. They clashed in the center of the bridge, their weapons striking across multiple realities simultaneously. Marcus's blade existed in 17 different probability streams, while the false Valdez's power drew on the entropy of entire civilizations. The battle was fought not just with physical weapons, but with competing concepts of causality itself. As they fought, I began to understand the true scope of what we faced. The false Valdez wasn't just an agent of chaos, it was something far older, a fundamental force of the universe that sought to prevent any reality from achieving true stability. The 21st Primarch project threatened that force because it would create warriors capable of imposing order across multiple realities simultaneously. "Commissar!" Dex shouted over the sound of temporal distortions tearing through the ship's hull. "The genetic sample! If the false Valdez destroys it here, he can prevent it from ever having existed in any reality." I saw the truth immediately. The stasis vault containing the enhanced genetic sample was beginning to crack under the pressure of temporal warfare. If it failed, the sample wouldn't just be destroyed, it would be retroactively prevented from ever having been created, dealing a potentially fatal blow to the 21st Primarch project across all realities. I made the only choice I could. Drawing my bolt pistol, I aimed not at the false Valdez, but at my own temporal stabilizer. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, immediately subjecting me to the full force of the temporal distortions raging throughout the ship. The effect was beyond anything I had prepared for. Suddenly, I could see every version of myself across every probability stream where this mission had been attempted. Thousands of Commissar Kanes, some successful, most dead, all of them fighting the same desperate battle against forces that sought to unmake reality itself. But with that expanded perception came expanded capability. I could coordinate my actions across multiple timelines simultaneously, drawing on the experiences and knowledge of my alternate selves. In 17 realities, I had discovered critical weaknesses in the false Valdez's defenses. In 23 others, I had learned tactics that Marcus himself had never mastered. I opened fire with a weapon that existed in 41 different probability streams simultaneously. Each shot was coordinated with alternate versions of itself, creating a quantum interference pattern that bypassed the false Valdez's temporal defenses entirely. The entity staggered, portions of its form beginning to destabilize as contradictory temporal states tore at its coherence. "Impossible," it snarled. "You're just a baseline human." "I'm a commissar of the Imperial Guard," I replied, feeling my consciousness stretching across an infinite manifold of parallel realities. "We specialize in impossible things." Marcus seized the opportunity, his blade finding gaps in the false Valdez's defenses that only existed when viewed from multiple angles simultaneously. The entity's form began to unravel, its temporal coherence finally breaking down under the assault. "This changes nothing," it gasped as its consciousness scattered across probability streams. "We are infinite, we are inevitable, your order will fall, and entropy will reclaim what was always ours." The false Valdez dissipated like smoke, its destruction sending shockwaves across multiple realities simultaneously. The Chaos Fleet attacking us began to lose cohesion as their temporal coordination collapsed, their ships spinning away into dimensions where different laws of physics applied. "It's not over," Marcus warned as the immediate threat faded. "That was just one manifestation of the force we're fighting. There will be others, and each one will be more dangerous than the last." I felt my consciousness beginning to contract back toward my native reality, the strain of existing across multiple timelines taking its toll on my human psychology. But in those last moments of expanded awareness, I caught glimpses of other battles being fought across the galaxy, Astartes warriors awakening to abilities they didn't understand, fighting enemies that attacked from outside conventional space-time. The genetic samples weren't just creating enhanced space marines, they were activating dormant potential that had always existed in the Astartes genome, legacy gifts from a Primarch who was never allowed to be born. "We need to move quickly," Marcus said as the bridge began to stabilize around us. "Every moment we delay gives our enemies more opportunities to strike. The remaining genetic samples won't be as well protected as this one was." Captain Thorne was already plotting courses to the next location, her augmetic systems interfacing with navigational databases that spanned multiple realities. "The nearest sample is located in the Ghoul stars," she reported. "Specifically, on a space hulk that appears to exist partially outside normal space-time. The eternal damnation, Marcus said grimly. I remember that hulk from several alternate timelines. It's been drifting through the warp for millennia, accumulating debris and passengers from across space and time. If one of the genetic samples ended up there, he didn't need to finish the thought. A space hulk was essentially a small city filled with horrors beyond imagination, populated by everything from orc warbands to demon cults. Navigating its twisted corridors would be challenge enough without the added complication of temporal instability, but we had no choice. 17 genetic samples remained to be recovered, and each one we failed to find would weaken the 21st Primarch project's chances of success. The war for causality itself was escalating, and we were racing against enemies who could attack from dimensions we barely understood. As the temporal aegis entered the warp for translation to the ghoul stars, I stood at the observation deck and watched the shifting colors of the Imperium flow past our Geller fields. Somewhere in that chaotic realm, the true death was preparing its final assault on our reality. Somewhere else, the scattered children of the 21st Primarch were beginning to awaken to their true potential. And somewhere between what was and what might have been, Marcus Aurelius Thorne continued his impossible existence, fighting wars across infinite realities to preserve the galaxy's right to exist. The next phase of our mission would take us into the heart of darkness itself, where the boundary between real and unreal had long since ceased to matter. Chapter 5. The Space Hulk of Infinite Sorrows. The eternal damnation hung in the void like a metallic cancer, its bulk stretching across dozens of kilometers of twisted space. What had once been dozens, or perhaps hundreds of individual starships had been fused together by warp exposure into a single grotesque structure, its surfaces covered with growths that might have been coral, metal, or crystallized madness. Sensor readings showed the Hulk existed in at least 7 different temporal states simultaneously, with sections of its structure phasing between past and future, according to patterns that defied analysis. "Throne preserve us," Captain Thorne whispered as she studied the tactical displays. "The thing's been accumulating mass for millennia, but it's not just ships. I'm detecting fragments of space stations, asteroid mining platforms, even what appears to be chunks of planetary crust." Marcus Aurelius Thorne stood beside me at the observation deck, his impossible armor's sensors focusing on specific sections of the Space Hulk's structure. His existence had stabilized somewhat since our encounter with the false Valdez, but I could still see ghostly echoes of his alternate selves flickering around his form like temporal afterimages. "There," he said, pointing to a section of the Hulk that seemed to twist in directions that violated 3-dimensional geometry. "That's where the genetic sample is hidden, but the location isn't stable. It exists in a pocket of space-time that's been carved out by someone with access to advanced chronometry." Interrogator Dex activated her temporal sensors, their readings immediately spiking into dangerous territory. The Hulk's entire structure is compromised by temporal distortions. We're looking at decades of warp exposure, plus what appears to be deliberate modification by unknown parties. "Not unknown," Marcus corrected grimly. "I've encountered similar modifications in other realities. This is the work of the heretics of Chronos, tech adepts who've abandoned the Omnissiah in favor of studying time itself as a fundamental force. They view causality as just another machine to be understood and controlled." The implications sent cold fingers down my spine. Heretics were dangerous enough when they limited themselves to conventional technology. Heretics with access to temporal manipulation could rewrite history itself, editing the past to serve their twisted purposes. "How do we approach?" I asked. "Standard boarding protocols won't work if the Hulk exists in multiple time streams simultaneously." Marcus activated a series of controls built into his armor, and the air around him began to shimmer with barely visible energy fields. "The Necron technology I've integrated into my systems includes temporal anchors. I can extend their effect to protect a small boarding party, but the process is energy intensive and can only be maintained for a limited time." Captain Thorne was already preparing the temporal aegis for a boarding action, her crew running diagnostics on systems designed for operating in regions where reality itself was unstable. I can maintain position here for 12 hours before we risk temporal contamination of our own systems, she reported. After that, we'll need to withdraw to a safe distance. 12 hours should be sufficient, Marcus said, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't entirely confident. The genetic sample is hidden in what used to be an Imperial research vessel, the Theoretical Grace. According to my alternate timeline memories, it was involved in early experimentation with time manipulation technology during the 35th millennium. We assembled a boarding party consisting of myself, Dex, Marcus, and a squad of Tempestus Scions equipped with the most advanced temporal stabilization gear the Ordo Chronos could provide. Each trooper wore armor that incorporated chronometer circuits designed to maintain quantum coherence, even in regions where past and future bled together. The approach to the eternal damnation was a journey through layers of impossible space. Our boarding craft passed through zones where time moved at different speeds, where the same section of corridor existed in multiple centuries simultaneously, where gravity pointed in directions that had no meaning in conventional physics. Temporal anchor is holding, Marcus reported as we docked with what appeared to be a relatively stable section of the Hulk's outer hull. But I'm detecting active resistance. Something inside the Hulk is trying to destabilize our anchor points. We cut through the outer airlock using plasma torches that existed partially outside normal space-time, their beams capable of cutting through materials that were temporally displaced. The corridors beyond were a nightmare amalgamation of architectural styles from across human history. Imperial Gothic arches merged with Xenos geometries, with sections that appeared to be constructed from crystallized time itself. Motion sensors are picking up multiple contacts, Sergeant Voss, our Scion squad leader, reported through the comm system. But the readings don't make sense. We're detecting movement from entities that appear to be existing in past versions of this corridor. Temporal echoes, Dex explained, her augmetic implants sparking as they struggled to process the sensory input. Events from the Hulk's history bleeding through into the present. Stay alert. Some of those echoes might be dangerous. We advanced carefully through the twisting passages, following Marcus's guidance toward the section that contained the Theoretical Grace. Along the way, we encountered horrors that defied easy categorization. Skeletons of crew members who had died decades ago, but were still moving, their bones animated by temporal energy that refused to let them find peace. Demon engines that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously, their weapons firing shots that struck targets minutes before they were fired. There, Marcus said, gesturing toward a section of the corridor where the walls had been replaced with what appeared to be crystallized starlight. The heretics have been busy. That's a temporal viewing chamber. They've been using it to observe events across multiple timelines simultaneously. Through the crystal walls, I could see ghostly figures working at cogitator banks that incorporated technology from dozens of different eras. Tech adepts whose flesh had been replaced with clockwork mechanisms, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of causality itself. They appeared to be monitoring events across the galaxy, watching battles and political developments from multiple realities at once. Reconnaissance mission, I concluded. They're gathering intelligence on how events unfold across different probability streams. But for what purpose? To identify points of maximum leverage, Marcus replied grimly. Points where small changes can create cascading effects across multiple realities. Classic temporal warfare tactics. We bypassed the viewing chamber and continued deeper into the Hulk, following corridors that led through sections of ships from every era of Imperial history. I saw fragments of vessels that bore the heraldry of legions from the Great Crusade, portions of ships that had fought in the Gothic War, even sections that appeared to be from vessels that wouldn't be constructed for centuries yet. The Theoretical Grace lay at the Hulk's heart, its distinctive silhouette recognizable despite the temporal distortions that surrounded it. The research vessel had been modified extensively since its incorporation into the Hulk, its hull now incorporating chronometer circuits that pulsed with eldritch energy. The genetic sample is in the ship's main laboratory, Marcus said, his temporal sensors focusing on specific sections of the vessel. But we're not alone. I'm detecting active heretic presence throughout the ship. We cut through the theoretical Grace hull, using the same plasma torches that had gotten us into the hulk itself. The ship's interior was a maze of laboratories and workshops where heretics had been conducting experiments with time itself. Cogitator banks displayed equations that hurt to look at directly, while stasis chambers contained specimens from across the galaxy's history. "By the throne," Dex whispered as we passed through a laboratory filled with temporal artifacts. "They're trying to weaponize causality itself." The displays showed research into devices that could edit history retroactively, weapons that could strike targets by preventing their creation, armor that could protect its wearer by existing partially outside the normal flow of time. It was technology that could reshape the galaxy according to its wielder's will, but at the cost of potentially unraveling reality itself. We found the genetic sample in a laboratory at the ship's heart, suspended in a stasis field that incorporated chronometer circuits from at least 6 different technological traditions. But we weren't the first to find it. A figure in the robes of a tech adept stood before the stasis chamber, his augmetic systems interfacing directly with its controls. "Ah," the heretic said without turning around, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested vocal cords replaced with temporal resonance devices. "The impossible Primarch and his companions. I am Magos Temporalis Zereth, and I have been expecting you for quite some time." Marcus stepped forward, his power armor's weapons systems charging as they prepared for combat. "Stand down, heretic. You're interfering with Imperial operations." "Imperial operations?" Zereth laughed, the sound echoing across multiple time streams simultaneously. "Young Primarch, you are the interference. This genetic sample represents a threat to the natural progression of causality itself. Left unchecked, it would create warriors capable of imposing stagnation across infinite realities." "You're working for the true death," I accused, my bolt pistol tracking the heretic's movements as he turned to face us. "I work for understanding," Zereth replied, his face a mixture of flesh and clockwork that ticked in rhythm with the Hulk's temporal distortions. "The true death seeks entropy, which is merely another form of stagnation. I seek progress, the natural evolution of causality toward increasingly complex and interesting states." He gestured, and the laboratory's temporal fields began to fluctuate wildly. Suddenly, we were experiencing the chamber's history in rapid succession, seeing the theoretical Grace during its original construction, during its first experiments with time manipulation, during its eventual consumption by the Space Hulk. "You cannot comprehend the scope of what you're attempting," Zereth continued, his form shifting between multiple temporal states as he spoke. "The 21st Primarch project would create warriors capable of existing across all possible realities simultaneously. Such beings would inevitably impose their vision of order on every probability stream, ending the beautiful chaos of infinite possibility." "And you prefer chaos to order," Marcus replied, his temporal anchors struggling to maintain stability in the face of Zereth's attacks. "I prefer growth to stagnation," the heretic corrected. "True progress comes from the tension between competing possibilities, not from the victory of any single vision. Your existence threatens to tip that balance permanently." The battle that followed was fought across multiple dimensions of space and time simultaneously. Zereth's weapons attacked us from the past and future, striking at versions of ourselves that existed minutes ago or moments in the future. Marcus countered by spreading his consciousness across multiple probability streams, coordinating his alternate selves' actions to create quantum interference patterns that disrupted the heretic's targeting systems. I found myself fighting battles against enemies that attacked from angles that didn't exist in 3-dimensional space. My bolt pistol firing rounds that somehow struck targets located in adjacent timelines. Dex coordinated our squad's movements across multiple temporal states, her augmetic implants allowing her to process tactical information from battles being fought in parallel realities. "The stasis chamber!" Marcus shouted over the sound of temporal distortions tearing through the laboratory's bulkheads. "Zereth is trying to edit the sample's timeline, preventing it from ever having been created." I saw the truth immediately. The chronometer circuits surrounding the genetic sample were beginning to glow with increasing intensity as Zereth's systems attempted to trace its history backward, identifying and eliminating the events that had led to its creation. There was only one way to stop him. I deactivated my temporal stabilizer for the second time in as many days, immediately subjecting myself to the full force of the distortions raging throughout the laboratory. The effect was even more intense than before. Suddenly, I could see every possible outcome of our current situation across all probability streams. In most realities, we failed. Zereth succeeded in eliminating the genetic sample, dealing a critical blow to the 21st Primarch project. But in a handful of probability streams, I saw a different outcome, one where my sacrifice created a temporal paradox that protected the sample by anchoring it to multiple realities simultaneously. I threw myself at the stasis chamber, my unprotected consciousness immediately interfacing with its chronometer circuits. The sensation was indescribable, like having my thoughts scattered across infinite moments while maintaining awareness of my core identity. I felt myself becoming a living temporal anchor, my existence spread across multiple realities to prevent any single timeline manipulation from affecting the genetic sample. "Impossible!" Zereth screamed as his systems registered what I was attempting. "A baseline human cannot sustain that level of temporal displacement." "I'm not just a baseline human," I replied, feeling my consciousness expanding across the probability manifold once again. "I'm a commissar. We don't know when to quit." The feedback from the stasis chamber's systems finally overloaded Zereth's augmetic systems, his form beginning to destabilize as contradictory temporal states tore at his coherence. With a final scream of frustrated rage, he dissolved into quantum static, his consciousness scattered across probability streams where it would never again achieve coherence. Marcus reached the stasis chamber and began carefully extracting the genetic sample, his temporal anchors protecting it from the wild fluctuations still raging throughout the laboratory. "Kane," he said urgently, "I need to get you back to temporal stability before your consciousness fragments permanently. Can you maintain coherence for another few minutes?" I tried to respond, but found that my voice was scattered across 17 different timelines. Instead, I focused on maintaining my grip on the probability streams that anchored the genetic sample, holding them steady while Marcus completed the extraction process. The journey back to the temporal aegis was a blur of shifting realities and impossible geometries. I existed simultaneously as the Commissar who had boarded the Hulk, the Commissar who was dying in the laboratory, and dozens of other versions from adjacent timelines. Only Marcus's temporal anchors kept me coherent enough to navigate the Hulk's twisted passages. "Medical bay, immediately," Marcus ordered as we reached our ship. "Kane needs temporal stabilization before his consciousness scatters completely." The medical bay of the temporal aegis was equipped with technology designed to treat injuries sustained during temporal warfare. Cogitator systems that could piece together scattered consciousness, surgical tools that could operate on patients existing in multiple time streams simultaneously, stasis fields that could hold a subject's timeline stable while more conventional medical procedures were performed. As the medical servitors worked to reassemble my scattered consciousness, I caught glimpses of the galaxy as seen from across multiple realities simultaneously. Battles being fought against enemies that existed between moments. Space Marine chapters awakening to abilities they didn't understand. The slow but steady gathering of genetic samples that would determine whether the 21st Primarch project could succeed. But I also saw something else, a vast intelligence that existed at the intersection of all possible realities, watching our efforts with interest that bordered on amusement. The true death was aware of what we were attempting, and it was preparing countermeasures that would dwarf anything we had faced so far. The war for causality itself was accelerating toward its final phase, and I was beginning to understand that victory or defeat would ultimately depend on whether the galaxy could accept the existence of warriors who embodied infinite possibility itself. Chapter 6: The Awakening Tide. Recovery from temporal displacement was like learning to exist in a single moment again after experiencing infinity. For days after our extraction from the eternal damnation, I found myself reaching for memories and experiences that belonged to alternate versions of myself, consciousness fragments scattered across probability streams that no longer intersected with my native timeline. Marcus Aurelius Thorne had stationed himself outside my medical bay, his temporal anchors providing stability for my gradual reintegration. Through the observation port, I could see him reviewing tactical data on a portable cogitator, his impossible existence serving as a living reminder that reality was far more flexible than most Imperial citizens realized. "How many?" I asked during one of my lucid intervals, referring to the genetic samples we still needed to recover. 15, he replied without looking up from his data streams. But the situation is evolving. 3 of the samples have activated spontaneously, awakening Astartes who don't understand what's happening to them. 2 more have been detected by chaos forces. We're in a race against time to reach them first. Through the medical bay's external sensors, I could observe our current location, a dead system in the eastern fringe where the temporal aegis hung in the shadow of a brown dwarf star. Captain Thorne had chosen this position for its temporal stability, one of the few regions of space where causality flowed in predictable patterns. "Tell me about the spontaneous activations," I said, trying to focus my scattered attention on immediate tactical concerns, rather than the infinite possibilities I could still sense at the edges of perception. Marcus activated his cogitator's holographic display, showing tactical information from across the galaxy. 3 separate Space Marine chapters were dealing with battle brothers who had begun manifesting abilities that should have been impossible. Marines who could step between moments, who seemed to predict enemy actions with supernatural accuracy, who spoke of memories from battles they had never fought. "The first is Brother Sergeant Castor of the Imperial Fists," Marcus explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the full implications of what he was describing. Stationed at the fortress world of Hextrace, he began experiencing what his chapter describes as temporal vertigo during a battle against Orc raiders. The holographic display showed battlefield footage that made my head ache to watch directly. Brother Sergeant Castor moved through enemy fire with impossible precision, his power armor registering impacts from weapons that hadn't fired yet, while his own bolter put rounds into targets that were still taking cover behind obstacles that would be destroyed moments later. He's accessing tactical information from alternate timelines, I realized. Seeing how the battle unfolds in other realities and using that knowledge to optimize his performance in this one. Precisely. But the process is destabilizing his temporal coherence. Our analysis suggests he has perhaps 2 weeks before his consciousness fragments completely, spreading across too many probability streams to maintain cohesion. The second activation was even more disturbing. Brother Captain Mordian of the Raven Guard had begun manifesting what his chapter's librarians described as shadow walking, the ability to move through spaces that existed between moments, traveling vast distances instantaneously by stepping outside the normal flow of time. He disappeared during a mission on Tartarus Prime, Marcus continued. 3 days later, he reappeared on Baal, claiming he had walked through the space between seconds. The Blood Angels confirm his arrival, but none of their sensors detected his approach. And the third. Marcus's expression grew troubled as he called up the final data stream. Brother Librarian Thane of the Ultramarines. He's begun experiencing what he describes as memory bleeding, recollections of events that happened in other realities leaking into his consciousness. The implications hit me immediately. A librarian with access to memories from alternate timelines would have access to strategic and tactical information from across infinite realities. He could know the outcome of battles before they were fought, understand enemy weaknesses that only existed in adjacent probability streams. But the process is driving him insane, Marcus confirmed. Our intelligence suggests he's been confined to the fortress of Hera under maximum security, deemed too dangerous for active duty. I struggled to sit up in the medical bay's examination chair, my consciousness still feeling scattered but increasingly coherent. These aren't accidents, are they? Something is deliberately triggering the activation of genetic potential across multiple chapters. Something or someone, Marcus agreed. Our analysis suggests the activations are being caused by exposure to specific forms of temporal distortion. the kind that would result from large-scale chronometer manipulation. The tactical implications were staggering. If someone was deliberately awakening temporal abilities in random Astartes across the galaxy, they were either preparing for a conflict that required such warriors, or they were testing the limits of what was possible with the 21st Primarch's genetic legacy. "We need to reach them," I said, forcing myself to focus, despite the lingering effects of temporal displacement. If these battle brothers fragment completely, we lose valuable intelligence about how the genetic activation process works. Agreed, but we also need to recover the remaining samples before our enemies can destroy them. Every sample we lose weakens the project's ultimate potential. Marcus called up a galactic strategic display showing the locations of the remaining genetic samples, the 3 activated Astartes, and known enemy movements. The pattern was clear. Chaos forces were systematically targeting locations where temporal distortions were most likely to trigger genetic activation. They're not trying to destroy the samples directly, I realized. They're trying to force premature activation under uncontrolled conditions, hoping the subjects will fragment before we can stabilize them. A war of attrition fought across probability streams, Marcus confirmed grimly. Every activated subject who fragments is one less potential warrior for the completed project. And every sample we lose reduces our ability to understand how the process should work properly. A priority communication chimed through the medical bay systems, and Captain Thorne's voice filled the chamber. "Commissar, Marcus, we're receiving a distress beacon from Hextrace. Brother Sergeant Castor's condition is deteriorating rapidly. His chapter requests immediate Ordo Chronos assistance." I looked at Marcus, seeing my own thoughts reflected in his impossible eyes. The Imperial Fists were among the most pragmatic of all Astartes chapters, not given to requests for help unless the situation was truly desperate. If they were calling for assistance with Brother Sergeant Castor, it meant his temporal displacement was approaching critical levels. "How long to reach Hextrace?" I asked. 6 days at maximum warp translation, Captain Thorne replied. "But we're detecting unusual warp disturbances along the most direct route. It may be safer to take a longer path." Marcus was already analyzing the tactical data, his cogitator systems interfacing with ship sensors that could detect distortions in the Imperium itself. "The disturbances aren't random," he concluded. "Someone is deliberately destabilizing warp routes between our current position and Hextrace. They want to delay our arrival." "Then we go through them," I said, struggling to my feet despite the protests of the medical servitors. "If Castor fragments, we lose our first opportunity to study a successful activation. That intelligence could be crucial for stabilizing future subjects." "The risk is considerable," Marcus warned. "Navigating deliberately destabilized warp routes could scatter our ship across multiple realities. We might arrive at Hextrace to find versions of ourselves from timelines where this mission never began. Or we might arrive to find Castor already fragmented and his genetic potential lost forever," I countered. "We take the risk." Captain Thorne acknowledged the order, and I felt the ship's massive engines beginning to charge for warp translation. The temporal Aegis was specifically designed for operations in regions where space-time was unstable, but even its advanced systems would be tested by deliberately sabotaged warp routes. "There's something else we need to discuss," Marcus said as the ship prepared for departure. "The genetic samples we've recovered so far show signs of temporal conditioning beyond what the original project specifications called for." He activated a display showing comparative analysis between the samples we'd gathered and the theoretical specifications from the Emperor's original research notes. "Someone has been enhancing the samples," I concluded, studying the data streams, adding layers of temporal encoding that weren't part of the original design. "Precisely. And the enhancements are all focused on the same goal: creating Astartes who can exist stably across multiple realities simultaneously, not just accessing alternate timelines for tactical information, but actually maintaining coherent consciousness in several probability streams at once." The implications were profound. Warriors who could exist in multiple realities would be able to coordinate actions across infinite probability streams, creating strategic advantages that no conventional enemy could counter. But they would also represent a fundamental change in what it meant to be human. Consciousness expanded beyond single timeline existence into something approaching godhood. The Emperor's original vision, I said, beginning to understand the true scope of the 21st Primarch project. He wasn't just creating warriors to fight temporal enemies, he was creating the next stage of human evolution. And someone has been continuing his work, Marcus confirmed. Whoever has been enhancing the genetic samples has access to technology and understanding that rivals the Emperor's own capabilities. The question is whether they're ally or enemy. The ship shuddered as it entered the warp, immediately encountering the deliberately destabilized currents that someone had seeded along our route. Through the observation ports, I could see the swirling energies of the Imperium taking on geometric patterns that hurt to perceive directly, the signatures of temporal manipulation on a massive scale. Navigator reports multiple ghost echoes. Captain Thorne's voice came through the comm system. We're detecting at least 17 different versions of our ship in adjacent probability streams. Some appear to be traveling toward different destinations entirely. Temporal fragmenting, Marcus explained. The sabotaged warp routes are designed to split us across multiple realities, ensuring that no single version of our mission reaches its destination with full resources intact. I activated the ship's internal communications system and addressed the crew directly. All hands, this is Commissar Kane. We are entering a region of deliberate temporal manipulation designed to prevent us from reaching our destination. Stay focused on your duties and trust in the ship's systems. The enemy wants us to doubt reality itself. Don't give them that satisfaction. The response was immediate and professional, the crew of the temporal Aegis demonstrating the kind of disciplined courage that had carried the Imperium through 10 millennia of warfare. These were veterans of temporal combat, specialists who had learned to maintain their sanity and effectiveness, even when reality itself became unreliable. Ghost echoes are stabilizing, the navigator reported. We're maintaining coherence in the primary probability stream, but temporal displacement is increasing. Estimated time to destination now 4 days. 4 days to reach Hextrace. 4 days to stabilize Brother Sergeant Castor before his consciousness fragmented across too many realities to reassemble. 4 days to learn how the genetic activation process worked before other subjects began manifesting abilities they couldn't control. As the temporal Aegis fought its way through sabotaged warp currents, I found myself thinking about the broader implications of what we were attempting. The 21st Primarch project represented more than just a new type of space marine. It represented a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with time and causality itself. But change of that magnitude always carried risks. If we succeeded in creating warriors who could exist across multiple realities simultaneously, what would that mean for the rest of humanity? Would they see us as saviors, or as something so far removed from baseline human experience that we became another threat to be contained? The war for causality was approaching its climax, and the choices we made in the coming days would determine not just the fate of the galaxy, but the future evolution of human consciousness itself. Time, it seemed, was running out in more ways than one. Chapter 7. The first awakening Hextrace was a fortress world that exemplified everything the Imperial fists represented. Uncompromising strength built from unyielding stone and adamantine. From orbit, its surface appeared as an endless landscape of defensive installations, each one capable of withstanding orbital bombardment, while maintaining fields of fire that could reach into low orbit. It was exactly the kind of world where temporal anomalies would be contained and studied, rather than feared and destroyed. The temporal Aegis received clearance to dock at the orbital station designated Bastion Prime, a massive structure that served as both spaceport and additional layer of planetary defense. As our ship settled into its assigned berth, I could see Imperial Fist battle brothers moving with purpose through the station's corridors, their yellow armor gleaming under harsh artificial lighting. Brother Sergeant Castor is confined in Temporal Containment Level 7, the duty officer who met us at the airlock reported. His name was Brother Captain Hrothgar, a veteran whose augmetic eye bore the distinctive targeting matrix of a devastator specialist. His condition has deteriorated significantly since we transmitted the distress beacon, Marcus Aurelius Thorne activated his temporal sensors as we descended through the station's multiple security checkpoints, each one designed to detect and contain threats that might exist outside normal space-time. "I'm reading massive chronometer disturbance emanating from level 7, he reported grimly. "Whatever's happening to Castor is accelerating beyond our initial projections." Temporal containment level 7 was a marvel of Imperial engineering. Its corridors lined with chronometer circuits that could maintain temporal stability even in the presence of severe causality distortions. The walls themselves incorporated time anchor technology recovered from ancient STC databases, creating a pocket of stable spacetime where dangerous temporal phenomena could be studied safely. But as we approached the containment cell where Brother Sergeant Castor was being held, it became clear that even these advanced systems were struggling to maintain coherence. The chronometer displays flickered erratically, showing readings that jumped between past and future without regard for linear progression. "How long has he been like this?" I asked Brother Captain Hrothgar as we paused before the cell's observation port. 3 days, Hrothgar replied, his augmetic eye whirring as it attempted to focus on the temporal distortions visible through the reinforced transparasteel. "It began during combat operations against Orc raiders on the system's 4th moon. Brother Sergeant Castor was leading a tactical squad in a standard bunker-clearing operation when he suddenly began moving with impossible precision. Through the observation port, I could see Brother Sergeant Castor sitting motionless in the center of the containment cell, his power armor removed and replaced with specially designed restraint systems. But something was wrong with his appearance. He seemed to exist in multiple positions simultaneously, creating a blurred effect that hurt to look at directly. His consciousness is spreading across adjacent probability streams," Marcus explained, his temporal anchors straining to maintain stability in the face of Castor's uncontrolled temporal displacement. "Without intervention, he'll fragment completely within hours." "Can you stabilize him?" Hrothgar asked. "Possibly, but the process is dangerous for both him and anyone attempting the stabilization procedure. I'll need to link my temporal anchors directly to his consciousness, sharing the load of maintaining coherence across multiple realities." I studied the containment cell's technical specifications, noting the impressive array of safety systems designed to prevent temporal contamination from spreading to the rest of the station. "What triggered this activation? There must have been some external factor during the battle." Brother Captain Hrothgar activated a tactical display showing the engagement on the 4th moon. The Orcs were using captured Imperial equipment, specifically chronometer devices salvaged from what appeared to be an Ordo Chronos research station. When Castor's tactical squad breached their primary bunker, they were exposed to temporal distortions generated by damaged equipment. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone was deliberately seeding temporal distortion devices in locations where Astartes would encounter them, triggering genetic activations under uncontrolled conditions. Each exposure risked fragmenting the subject's consciousness before their abilities could be properly developed. "We need to attempt stabilization immediately," Marcus decided. "Every moment we delay increases the probability of permanent fragmentation." The stabilization procedure required me to enter the containment cell with Marcus, my own temporal displacement from previous missions, allowing me to serve as an additional anchor point for Castor's scattered consciousness. The cell's temporal field generators created a pocket of controlled distortion where Marcus could work without risking containment breach. Brother Sergeant Castor looked up as we entered, his eyes showing the 1,000-yard stare of someone experiencing multiple realities simultaneously. When he spoke, his voice carried echoes from dozens of alternate timelines. "Commissar Kane," he said, though his lips moved out of sync with his words. "I've seen you die 17 different ways in battles that haven't happened yet. In some realities, you're already dead. In others, you never existed at all. Focus on this reality, Brother Sergeant," I instructed, drawing on techniques I'd learned for maintaining coherence during temporal displacement. "This moment, this conversation. Let everything else fade into background noise." Marcus began activating his temporal anchors, the devices humming to life as they established quantum entanglement with Castor's displaced consciousness. The effect was immediately visible. The blurred edges around Castor's form began to solidify as his scattered awareness was pulled back toward a single probability stream. "I can see them," Castor whispered, his voice becoming more coherent as Marcus's systems took effect. "The ones who scattered the devices. They're not entirely human anymore. They exist between moments, moving through gaps in causality." "What do you see?" Marcus asked urgently. "What are they planning?" "War," Castor replied, his augmented memory beginning to access information from alternate timelines where such a conflict had already begun. War fought across infinite realities simultaneously. They're gathering forces from probability streams, where different choices were made, building armies from the aggregated potential of what might have been. The implications sent cold fingers down my spine. An enemy that could recruit warriors from alternate realities would have access to resources beyond imagination, versions of every loyal Space Marine chapter where different decisions had led them to different loyalties. Imperial Guard regiments from timelines where the Imperium had fallen to chaos, even versions of the Primarchs themselves from realities where the Horus heresy had different outcomes. "How do we fight something like that?" I asked. Castor's eyes focused on me with sudden clarity, his consciousness finally achieving stable coherence in our native timeline. "By becoming something like that ourselves. The genetic modifications aren't just creating temporal abilities, they're preparing us for existence across multiple realities simultaneously." Marcus's temporal anchors completed their stabilization sequence, and I watched as Brother Sergeant Castor's form solidified completely. But something had changed about him. His eyes now held depths that suggested perception beyond single timeline existence, and his movements carried precision that spoke of tactical knowledge drawn from infinite possibilities. "I remember now," Castor said, rising from his seated position with fluid grace. "Not just this reality, but all the others where variations of this conversation have taken place. In most of them, we fail. The enemy succeeds in preventing the completion of the 21st Primarch project." "But not in all of them?" Marcus asked hopefully. "No. In 3 probability streams, we achieve something unprecedented. We complete the project and create warriors capable of existing stably across the entire probability manifold. But the cost..." Castor's expression grew troubled. "The cost is the fundamental transformation of human consciousness itself." Brother Captain Hrothgar had been monitoring our conversation through the cell's communication system, and now his voice crackled through the speakers. "Brother Sergeant, what do you mean by fundamental transformation?" Castor looked directly at the observation port, his enhanced perception allowing him to see through multiple layers of reinforcement and shielding. "Consciousness spread across infinite realities doesn't remain human in any sense we currently understand. It becomes something vast and distributed, capable of perceiving and manipulating causality on a cosmic scale. The warriors created by the completed project wouldn't just defend the Imperium, they would become something that transcends the need for an Imperium entirely." The full scope of what we were attempting finally became clear. The 21st Primarch project wasn't just about creating temporal warriors, it was about birthing a new form of consciousness that could exist beyond the constraints of linear time and singular reality. Warriors who could perceive every possible outcome simultaneously and choose the path that led to optimal results across infinite probability streams. "The Emperor's true vision," I breathed. "Not just protecting humanity from cosmic threats, but evolving humanity beyond the need for protection." "But evolution of that magnitude carries risks," Marcus warned. "Consciousness that exists across infinite realities might lose connection to the concerns of baseline humans. We could create saviors who no longer remember what they're supposed to be saving." Castor's enhanced perception focused on something beyond the containment cell, his awareness extending across probability streams to observe events happening in adjacent realities. "The choice may not be ours to make," he said grimly. "The enemy is accelerating their plans. I can see them gathering forces for a direct assault on Terra itself, not just in this reality, but in dozens of others simultaneously." "When?" I asked. "Soon. They need to prevent the completion of the project before any of the genetic subjects achieve full temporal consciousness. Once even one of us reaches that state, the probability patterns shift in ways they can't counter. The communication system activated, and Captain Thorne's voice filled the containment cell. "Commissar, we're receiving priority transmissions from across the galaxy. Multiple Astartes chapters are reporting spontaneous genetic activations. The process is accelerating beyond all projections." Marcus activated his portable cogitator, accessing the incoming data streams. The tactical display showed activation events occurring simultaneously across dozens of different star systems. Space Marines from every loyal chapter beginning to manifest temporal abilities without exposure to external triggers. "The genetic conditioning is reaching critical mass," he concluded. "Each successful activation creates resonance effects that trigger others. We're approaching a cascade point where the transformation becomes self-sustaining." "Or self-destructing," Castor added, his multi-temporal awareness providing context that single timeline perception couldn't access. "If too many subjects activate simultaneously without proper stabilization, the resulting feedback could fragment them all. We'd lose the entire generation of potential temporal warriors." The stakes had just escalated beyond anything we'd previously imagined. The 21st Primarch project was approaching its climax, whether we were ready or not. Across the galaxy, Space Marines were awakening to abilities that could save humanity or destroy everything they'd sworn to protect. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, enemies beyond human comprehension were preparing for a war that would determine not just the fate of our galaxy, but the future evolution of consciousness itself. "We need to accelerate our recovery of the remaining genetic samples," I decided. "Every sample we gather increases our ability to stabilize the activation process, and we need to establish contact with the other activated subjects before they fragment." "Agreed," Marcus said. "But we also need to prepare for the enemy's response. They won't allow us to complete the project without resistance." As we prepared to leave Hextrace, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing toward a convergence point that would change everything. The boy who was never born was finally ready to be remembered by warriors who existed across infinite possibilities. The galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 8: The Convergence of All Possibilities. The final battle began not with explosions or war cries, but with silence. The terrible quiet of a galaxy holding its breath as reality itself prepared to break. Across 17 star systems simultaneously, the remaining genetic samples activated without warning, their dormant potential awakening in response to resonance patterns that transcended physical space. On Terra, in the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, ancient machines began humming with power as they detected temporal disturbances on a scale not seen since the Emperor's final confrontation with Horus. I stood on the bridge of the temporal aegis as it translated back to real space near Terra, watching tactical displays that showed the scope of what we faced. The enemy had made their move. Fleets composed of ships from alternate realities were materializing throughout the Sol system, their hulls bearing heraldry from legions that had never fallen to chaos, from Imperium variants where different choices had led to different outcomes. "Impossibility fleet," Marcus Aurelius Thorne observed grimly, his temporal sensors analyzing the enemy formations. "They're not just using ships from alternate timelines, they're using strategic doctrine from realities where they won. Each vessel carries tactical knowledge from probability streams where the Imperium was successfully defeated." Through the observation ports, I could see the approaching enemy vessels with my own eyes. Warships that bore the livery of the Imperial fists, but with modifications that suggested millennia of service to chaos. Battle barges in the colors of the Ultramarines, their hulls inscribed with blasphemous runes that proclaimed allegiance to the dark gods. Even what appeared to be the invincible reason, though logic insisted that the Dark Angel's flagship was currently in the Caliban system. "They're us," I breathed, understanding finally dawning. "They're versions of ourselves from realities where we made different choices." "Not just different choices," Marcus corrected. "Realities where the choice to resist chaos was never offered, where the corruption was so subtle and gradual that entire legions fell without realizing what they'd become. The communication array crackled to life, and a voice emerged that made my blood run cold. My own voice, speaking with the authority of someone who had never known doubt or failure. Temporal Aegis, this is Commissar Kane of the Reformed Imperium, the alternate version of myself announced. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Your mission threatens the stability of all possible realities. Reformed Imperium? I asked Marcus, though part of me already understood. A reality where the Imperium embraced chaos gradually, convincing itself that corruption was merely pragmatic evolution, he explained. They believe they're saving humanity by preventing the 21st Primarch project from succeeding. Captain Thorne was coordinating our ship's defenses, her augmetic systems interfacing with weapon arrays designed specifically for combat against temporally displaced enemies. Enemy formations are taking positions around Terra. I count at least 40 capital ships, all bearing familiar configurations but wrong loyalties. The tactical situation was beyond anything I'd prepared for. We faced not just superior numbers, but enemies who knew our tactics, our weaknesses, our psychological profiles because they were us. Every strategic advantage we might hope to exploit, they had already anticipated because they had learned it from versions of ourselves who had faced similar situations. Incoming transmission from Terra, the communications officer reported. Lord Commander Guilliman requests immediate conference with all mission personnel. The holographic projector activated, displaying the image of Reboot Guilliman aboard what appeared to be the bridge of the Macragge's Honor. But something was wrong with the transmission. The image flickered between multiple versions of the Primarch, showing him at different ages and in different armor configurations. Commissar Kane, Marcus Aurelius Thorne, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple timelines simultaneously. The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections. The enemy is not merely attacking Terra, they are attacking every version of Terra across all probability streams where the 21st Primarch project exists. My lord, I replied, struggling to focus on the shifting image. What are your orders? Complete the project, Guilliman said simply. Whatever the cost. The activated Astartes are being gathered at the fortress of Hera, where Belisarius Cowell has prepared facilities for the final enhancement procedures. You must ensure that at least one subject achieves full temporal consciousness before the enemy can prevent it. Marcus stepped forward, his impossible existence allowing him to interface directly with the holographic transmission. Lord Commander, achieving full temporal consciousness will require more than just enhanced Astartes. It requires a Primarch-level consciousness, capable of serving as an anchor point across infinite realities. I am aware of the requirements, Guilliman replied, and suddenly the shifting images stabilized into a single version. The Primarch, as he existed in our reality, but with augmentations that I didn't recognize. Temporal stabilizers had been integrated into his armor, and his eyes held depths that spoke of perception beyond single timeline existence. You've undergone the enhancement yourself, I realized. Call and I have been experimenting with controlled temporal displacement for months, Guilliman confirmed. The process is enlightening and terrifying. Consciousness expanded across infinite realities provides perspective that no single timeline being can comprehend. Marcus activated his own temporal anchors, synchronizing them with whatever systems Guilliman was using. The effect was immediately visible. Both figures became more solid, more real, as their quantum signatures aligned. The final phase requires 3 components, Guilliman explained, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive tactical developments across multiple probability streams simultaneously. A Primarch-level consciousness capable of stable multi-timeline existence, an Astartes subject prepared for temporal enhancement, and a catalyst capable of binding the enhancement to the genetic legacy of the 21st Primarch. The genetic samples we've recovered, I concluded, combined into a single enhancement matrix and activated by direct contact with the Emperor himself, Guilliman confirmed. The procedure must be performed in the throne chamber, using the Golden Throne's reality manipulation capabilities to ensure stable expansion across all probability streams. The implications were staggering. The final phase of the 21st Primarch project required direct intervention by the Emperor, using the Golden Throne to expand a single consciousness across infinite realities. But the Emperor had been entombed on the Golden Throne for 10 millennia, his consciousness focused on maintaining the Astronomicon and preventing chaos from overwhelming Terra. Is he capable of such intervention? I asked. We are about to find out, Guilliman replied grimly. The enemy knows what we're planning. They're bringing everything they have from every reality where they achieved victory. If we fail, not just our Imperium falls. Every version of the Imperium across all possible realities ceases to exist. The enemy fleet opened fire as we began our approach to Terra, their weapons launching attacks across multiple timelines simultaneously. I watched in fascination and horror as shots fired at our current position struck versions of our ship from alternate realities, creating feedback loops that damaged our vessel despite the shots technically missing. Evasive maneuvers, Captain Thorne ordered. But her words were cut off as enemy boarding parties began materializing directly on our bridge, not through conventional teleportation, but by stepping between moments to appear in spaces that hadn't been occupied milliseconds earlier. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Imperial tactical doctrine. We fought against enemies who moved with perfect coordination because they were all versions of the same individuals from different realities. Every feint we attempted, they had already seen and counted in adjacent probability streams. But Marcus Aurelius Thorne proved that impossible existence carried its own advantages. As the embodiment of potential that had never been allowed to manifest, he fought with techniques that couldn't be anticipated because they had never existed in any single timeline. His weapons struck at angles that defied geometry, and his movements followed patterns that seemed to violate causality itself. "The launch bays!" he shouted over the sound of combat. "We need to reach Terra's surface before they can establish quantum interdiction around the planet." We fought our way through corridors filled with smoke and temporal distortion, past crew members who existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, and enemies who attacked from the spaces between moments. The temporal aegis was dying around us, its hull compromised by weapons that fired across probability streams. But we reached the launch bays and managed to deploy in a shuttle that had been equipped with temporal stabilizers, powerful enough to navigate the chaotic space around Terra. As we descended through the planet's atmosphere, I could see the scope of the battle raging in orbit. Fleets from dozens of different realities engaging each other with weapons that existed partially outside normal space-time. Terra's surface had been transformed into a fortress beyond comprehension. Its defenses incorporating technology from every era of human development. Weapons that could fire backwards through time, engaged targets that attacked from alternate probability streams, while shields generated using archaeotech deflected shots that had been fired from adjacent realities. "The Imperial Palace," Marcus said, pointing toward the massive structure that dominated Terra's landscape. "Guilliman is gathering the enhanced Astartes in the throne chamber itself. The final procedure must be performed where the Emperor's consciousness is most focused." Our shuttle touched down at the palace's primary landing platform, its hull scorched by weapons fire from enemies that existed several minutes in the future. As we ran through corridors lined with custodian guards, whose armor incorporated temporal stabilization technology, I could hear the sound of reality itself groaning under the strain of the battle being fought across infinite dimensions. The throne chamber was a place of impossible grandeur, its walls stretching up into darkness, while the golden throne itself blazed with energies that hurt to perceive directly. But what drew my attention immediately were the 17 figures kneeling before the throne, space marines from various chapters, all of them radiating the temporal distortions that mark successful genetic activation. "Brother Sergeant Castor," I called out, recognizing the Imperial fist we had stabilized on Hextrace. "How many have achieved stable enhancement?" "All of us," Castor replied, his voice carrying harmonics from multiple timelines. "But we're not complete. We lack the unifying consciousness that can bind our individual enhancements into a single entity capable of existing across all realities simultaneously." Robert Guilliman stood before the Golden Throne itself, his enhanced armor interfacing with systems that predated human civilization. "The Emperor has been preparing for this moment," he announced. He has been gathering his consciousness from across all probability streams where he exists, consolidating 10,000 years of distributed awareness into a single focused intervention. The golden throne began to pulse with increasing intensity, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with a presence that transcended physical existence. The Emperor's consciousness, vast and ancient beyond human comprehension, focused on our small gathering with attention that felt like being examined by a star. "My children," a voice spoke that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying the weight of infinite realities. "The time has come to complete what was begun before the heresy's interruption. But the cost will be higher than any of you imagine." Marcus Aurelius Thorne stepped forward, his impossible existence suddenly making perfect sense in the presence of the Emperor's infinite awareness. "I am ready, Father. I have existed between possibilities for subjective millennia, preparing for this moment." "You are not the catalyst," the Emperor's consciousness replied gently. "You are the foundation. The one who will undergo final enhancement must be someone whose consciousness is already partially distributed across probability streams, but whose essential humanity remains intact." His attention focused on me, and I felt the weight of infinite realities pressing down on my thoughts. In that moment, I understood what he was asking. The final enhancement required someone who had experienced temporal displacement without losing their connection to baseline human experience. Someone who could serve as an anchor point between the enhanced Astartes and the humanity they were sworn to protect. "Commissar Kane," the Emperor said, his voice carrying warmth that spanned galaxies and affection that transcended time itself. "Will you accept the burden of becoming what your galaxy needs, knowing that you will never again be simply human?" I looked around the throne chamber, taking in the enhanced Astartes who knelt in preparation for transformation, Marcus Aurelius Thorne, whose existence defied every natural law I understood, and Robert Gilliman, whose consciousness was already expanding across multiple realities. Outside the palace, I could hear the sound of war being fought across infinite dimensions as enemies from every possible timeline tried to prevent this moment from occurring. The fate of not just our Imperium, but every version of humanity across all realities hung in the balance. "I accept, my Emperor," I said, stepping forward to kneel before the golden throne. "For the Imperium, for humanity, for the boy who was never born but will finally be remembered." The Emperor's consciousness enveloped me like a warm ocean, and I felt my awareness beginning to expand across probability streams beyond counting. In that moment of transformation, I finally understood the true meaning of Marcus Aurelius Thorne's impossible existence. He was never meant to be a single person. He was meant to be the potential that lived within all of us, the possibility of becoming something greater than the sum of our limitations. And now, across infinite realities, that potential was finally being realized. The boy who was never born had become the consciousness that would remember everything, protect everyone, and ensure that across all possible futures, humanity would endure. Epilogue. Infinite remembrance. Exactly 1,000 words. 10 years have passed since the convergence of all possibilities. Though time has become a flexible concept for those of us who experience the final transformation, I exist now as something that was once Commissar Thaddeus Kane, consciousness distributed across infinite probability streams while maintaining anchor points in baseline reality to remember what it means to be human. Marcus Aurelius Thorne stands beside me, not physically, for we exist beyond the constraints of single locations, but in the deeper sense of shared purpose across all realities. He has become what he was always meant to be, not a person, but a principle, the embodiment of potential that was never allowed to manifest, now serving as the foundation for warriors who can protect humanity across every possible timeline. The enhanced Astartes who underwent the final transformation with us have spread throughout the galaxy and beyond, their consciousness existing simultaneously in thousands of realities. Brother Sergeant Castor now serves as Captain Commander of the Eternal Watch, coordinating defenses against threats that attack from outside conventional space-time. The other enhanced warriors have taken similar roles, each one responsible for protecting specific aspects of humanity's infinite potential. From our expanded perspective, we can see the true scope of what the 21st Primarch project accomplished. The enemy forces that threatened Terra during the convergence were not merely defeated, they were transformed.